See you, Martin.
Can you see me?
No.
Not yet.
Oh, hang on. There we go.
Well,
There
there
we
you
go.
are.
All right, I'm going to bring people in now. Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this latest series of awards talks. And it's my pleasure to introduce the RPS's awards manager, Joe McDonald, who will introduce this evening, and our speakers who will be in conversation later. Joe, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to tonight's conversation between Sian and Martin. Sian is a UK-based artist, and her work is concerned with concepts surrounding photography and its relations with objects, environment and performance. She received her honorary fellowship in 2010. Martin Barnes is Senior Curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum. He received the Society's J. Dudley Johnston Award in 2013. We will open up the public Q&A after the conversation. If you have questions, please enter them in Zoom chat. Our next conversation will be between Bruno Sachel and Leslie Martin, both of whom have received the Society's Award for Photographic Publishing. The talk will take place during the evening of Tuesday, the 5th of October, and all details are on our website. Over to you, Sian and Martin.
Thank you.
Joe, thank you, Michael. Hello, everybody. And hello, Sian.
Hello, Martin.
Sian and I have been in sort of dialogue about her work for since about 1998, I think.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to have the opportunity to engage with you in conversation, because I feel like I've dipped into your work at different stages, and we've acquired some pieces for the permanent collection of the V&A. But part of my remit is to collect certain artists' work in depth and to sort of check in with them every so often and see, where they're at and keep in touch with their practice. And so what I'd like to do is speak with Sian on a roughly chronological journey through her work. And we're not going to cover everything by any means. And Sian has a tremendous body of work that stretches over a long period of time with lots of different kind of avenues explored. But we're going to touch on some of the very key, or what I think and what Sian thinks are some of the key series of work that show changes in her practice as well. But we're going to cover quite a lot of ground. We're going to talk about Dada, I think. We're going to talk about obsessions. We're going to talk about joy, the love of making things, and serious play, willful amateurism. Lots of things I think will come up in the work. But I'm going to hand over to Sian just to introduce us to a few of the images that I saw when she first brought them into the V&A. And it's hard to remember now, but a kind of physical prints in 1998 were a kind of way to go. So an artist would bring a box of pictures to the museum, and we would find some time to sit with them and look through the pictures. And so that's how our dialogue began around them. But do you want to share your screen?
Yes, I'll do that now. Thanks, Martin. And thank you very much, Joe, for the introduction, and Michael as well, and RPS for inviting me and Martin to talk tonight. It's lovely to be here. I'm going to just share. Can everybody see my screen?
That looks perfect, Sian. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. So, okay. Oh, I don't know why this is. Oh, here we go. So this was actually one of the images that I brought to the V&A, and in fact, so this was when we started our conversation, and so this was from a small body of work called Groundings that was made between 1994 and 1997. and very much based around my experience as a woman and a mother, living in quite a rural location. That patch of trees was the village called Portisham where I used to live, and I made a point of just going off just for sort of like no further than half an hour's walking, and would make these pictures. And the starting point for these really was this notion of what happens if I were to try something different out. So I couldn't really get engaged with being a landscape photographer. I was interested in landscape and I was wanting to develop my skills in photography, but I felt I couldn't really add to the canon. So in the nature of when we go on walks and we pick up pebbles and shells and things like that, I turned it on its head and decided to take what was mostly my life at the time as a young mother of small children. I think they would have been about 2 or 3 at the time when I first started doing this work, and I would take the things that I was using as a mum out with me, and then this was eventually shown in an exhibition, a solo exhibition in Bristol at Watershed, and through a kind of long sort of strange situational thing, I ended up taking them into the V&A one day, having been asked to bring them in and to show them to Martin and Mark and the team. So,
Sian, what I liked about this straight away was that it was, there's a small element in the picture that just disrupted everything. So, one thought you were looking at kind of classic black and white landscape photography, and then suddenly there was this, what looked like a kind of cookie cutter sheep shape in the landscape. So you were bringing in this kind of element that was kind of playful and funny, but it had this kind of absurdity and humor about it that sort of disrupted what you thought you were seeing with a very simple economy of means. So I think that's what, visually and conceptually, it just kind of struck a chord as being something that was elegantly and simply done, but opened up a lot of questions just by very simple kind of conflating two things that sort of shouldn't be together in a way. And I liked that about that work. And I've always been kind of curious about the different registers, like almost like a kind of musical key in, like what key are you playing in?
yeah.
Are you playing in a minor key? Are you playing in a major key? How am I, as a viewer, responding to these works? So the tone, I couldn't quite get it at first, and it slightly threw me. Was it funny? Was it playful? Was it sort of deadly serious? I couldn't quite get it, and that needled me and made me want to look more. But perhaps you could show us the next picture, because you move into colour, don't you? And then something's more sculptural in a way.
So the next one was, this one was from a series called Putting Hills in Holland, and ended up, this was the one that you purchased. And I was just mentioned it a bit earlier to you today that weirdly, I got this very nice email on 9/11. It was in the morning before anything happened, and I was absolutely overjoyed that the museum had purchased this work and would to show it. And I had a few friends in New York at the time, and I remember writing to them all in an email and saying, "Oh, this amazing thing's just happened," and then sort of like 5 hours later, having to sort of write to them all and kind of apologise for being so cheerful when this absolutely.
There's food that will be ready in 15 minutes.
Hello.
We got an interloper.
someone say that tea was going to be ready in
Tea's ready in 15 minutes. Great.
That's very apt, isn't it? That's the
That's all right. Thank you, Carolyn. Tea in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Was that Carolyn? So,
A
so
good
anyway,
domestic disruption. That's perfect.
yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
It's the ideal description for that. So yeah, so that was I suppose, how did it carry on from the earlier where I was kind of a number of things were going on at the same time, in that I was quite intrigued with the horizontal line of the landscape, and but also it was this idea of everything being so flat. I really did have this urge to sort of go the opposite of horizontal and go all vertical. So that's what I was sort of piling these strange kind of kitchen implements up, and with cakes.
Holland, isn't it? I think that's why it's,
Yeah.
you know, it's dead flat landscape,
Yeah.
which has this long history of artistic, you know, depiction, and you're there trying to disrupt it, put hills back into Holland, but in a way which uses kind of domestic jelly molds and confectionery. So it's kind of disrupting that serious tradition.
And I think the use of pink was also quite a sort of, you know, a test of, is this allowed? Am I allowed to put some, you know, something that is pink in the landscape or in a serious picture? So, yeah.
And, you know, with very simple means, again, it connects up with that long tradition of kind of Dada sculpture, in a way that you use found objects to make something. You look at the familiar objects as strange again. So you're disrupted in what you're looking at, I think.
Yeah. And also, I think what had happened was that when I started with the other work, that the previous work that I showed just now, the groundings, at the time I was very exercised by ecology, ecological issues, politics of farming, food, what we were eating. As a mother of small boys, it was like, well, you know, what's their future going to be with if the landscape is used, you know, at the time it was a time of BSE, so all sorts of, you know, quite horrible practices were going on, and I was being deadly earnest with this work. And when it was shown, people were like just kind of falling over themselves in hysterical laughter, and I was quite affronted by this, and thought, why are they laughing at my work? And I thought, what am I doing wrong, you know? And then so there was a number of, I suppose there was kind of 4 years between that first series of work and this series. And I realized that if I was obviously somebody, because it didn't matter what I did, people were just laughing at my stuff if they were funny. So I made these funny pictures and I couldn't help it. And I thought, well, maybe I can use that humor in a way. And because, you know, when I'd been a student, I'd studied sculpture actually, and I was very, very interested in absurdism and the theatre of the absurd, theatre, all of those sort of things, and Dada, which we might talk a bit more about in a minute. And I thought, well, maybe I can use the humour as a sort of tool to get the audience involved and interested. And so instead of uncontrollable laughter, there would be like, I would be controlling what was funny or not in the pictures. So I think that for me was a really helpful point of learning.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you were also, this one entered as well, because that was partly because there was a bit of a dink when at the point of handing it over, the other one, and so I sort of offered an extra one as well, which was really nice that that you all said yes, so telling me to take it
Yes,
home.
you were handing over your prints, say, here's the one, I'm going to sign it. And
Yeah,
as
and
you were doing that,
I had to get it remade. It was like, yeah,
which
I was
meant
mortified.
and you were mortified. So that, well, okay, let me give you something else as well. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah, this entered the collection by stealth nicely. Yeah. And so again, this is you kind of reclaiming, you know, a landscape, a seascape view in a way, with this kind of disjunctive domestic implements and these kind of bright colors. And again, it's just sort of simply done. But it's you creating a kind of sculpture in the landscape. And so it's not so much about, you know, the making a fine print, although you do make very beautiful prints, and you know how to use a camera and all of that. But it's so much about the idea that comes through that makes you look well beyond that technical side of things. Can we talk about some of your influences? Because I think that helps really position where you come from, because you see these pictures of yours and you sort of wonder what's going on in your brain, and where does this all build up from. So we've got a few pictures here to show.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin. I thought I'd just show a few of the very early influences, and this one is this. I keep doing this. I must stop that. Moving the cursor around the screen. I do apologise. Yeah, I'm going to just stop fiddling. So the seal, it is Brancusi's seal, which is a sculpture of carving. And I first saw that when I was 19 and went to Paris. First time I'd ever been abroad. And I had been, at this time, I'd started nursing. I didn't go straight into art school or anything like that. It was at a time when parents still kind of controlled a little bit what their kids did for educate, for as a job or whatever, and to sort of keep the peace. It was like, and the fact that I didn't have that many qualifications, it was a question of I'll be a nurse, and which was fine. I did actually train and see it through, but at the time I really, really wanted to go to art school, but that was sort of not really on the cards until I was sort of 21. And but when I went to Paris, I was completely thrown by this sculpture. It was, to me, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And it was also the strangest thing I'd ever seen, but it was so absolutely and completely a piece of work, a piece of art that spoke to me. Up until this point, I had very little knowledge of painting, sculpture, anything. If I'd seen any sculptures at all, they were statues of, rather bewhiskered gentlemen in, parliamentary squares, and they were, bronze and very boring and dull. And and that to me was sculpture. It was like, who would want to make sculpture? But I saw this and it was like, I have to be part of this world. I have to be part of this artistic place that makes stuff like this, because it was, I was just completely blown away by it. So I was doing these evening classes in painting as while I was training, and that was just one evening a week, and that saw me through. And then the minute I qualified, I ended up going to art school. So I did foundation at Harrow, and then that was for a year, and then I ended up studying sculpture at Chelsea School of Art in London. And one of the first things that I saw in London when I was a student was a show at the Whitechapel of Eva Hess, American sculptor, who I was completely blown away by this work. So she was huge influence on me. And at the same time, Agnes Martin, a very wonderful American painter. It's weird how they're all American, apart from Brancusi, who was he was based in Paris, but he was from Romania. Agnes Martin, American painter, very, very minimal, extremely beautiful, and the kind of like very Zen sort of pictures, you know, but I absolutely loved them. And another huge influence was Alice Aycock, who was making these strange structures in the American countryside, wooden structures. And then another American land artist called Mary Miss, who was doing kind of the opposite. She was going underground and making these sort of strange wooden structures under the ground. So there was this, and at the time it was like, I didn't see this as what I can understand to it now, which is how I view it now, is something that you alluded to, Martin, where a little earlier, where you said that I was reclaiming that beach, and that's what these women were doing, Mary Miss and Alice Aycock. They were claiming the land as theirs, as females. And another huge influence on me was, I mentioned the Theatre of the Absurd, so Samuel Beckett. I got into him because I had a job as a usherette at the Royal Court Theatre, which was just up the road in Sloane Square from Chelsea. We were in the King's Road, just off the King's Road and Manresa Road. And so I would be an usherette, and I got to see all the plays, and I was just completely taken with these plays. I was utterly absorbed with Beckett's, the way he absolutely literally wrote the set, the stage set and the costumes into the plot. So the text was you could not do anything other than what he had actually written it as. Whereas in other plays, I was noticing, you know, the playwright would allow any kind of interpretation by the designer. They could do whatever they wanted, but there was sort of slight differences of interpretation, but the plot always sort of, the set was always very much entangled in the plot and in the text. And so that for me was incredible. And you know, and I met him, and also this was Billy Whitelaw, who was his sort of muse, and she was Winnie in the play Happy Days. It was just the most amazing experience to be there.
Sorry, pedal back a bit, Sian. You said you met him. I
did meet him, yes, very briefly. Yes, because he came to all the rehearsals, and we met him. Everyone was starstruck. He was very nice. This is talking about Dada. This influence came a lot later because she's been quite well hidden. And there was this marvelous book called Women in Dada that I read about 5-6 years ago. And a lot of the women Dada artists were sort of hidden by the men. And it was, you know, sort of 100 years ago. So this was Baroness Elsa Freytag von Loringhoven, who was German, I think, and she married this baron, and moved to the States, and ended up being, you know, a walking sculpture. And she would make these strange costumes, and there she is, you know, with her biscuit cutters. You know, she'd done it 100 years well before I had. And so I just found this really amazing that this was sort of very much had happened already, and she kind of gave me the go-ahead in a way that it's like, okay, you know, it wasn't so daft, because she is with her spoons and her headdress and everything. So I found her hugely exciting. And also the story goes that she was actually the person that was Armat, you know, the Duchamps, yeah. And so she was obsessed with Duchamp, and she was madly in love with him, and I think he sort of played along with it a bit, but he wasn't that impressed with her. But she gave him the loo, you know, I can't think what it's called now, and he sort of accepted it and took it as his own. So, but apparently it is contested now that she was the person that made that. So that's quite interesting.
I think what's quite exciting about this, though, if you go back,
yeah,
is the photograph of it, because there's a huge distance between the setup of that, particularly the one on the right with the spoons and the,
and I think she photographed herself. I think it was her that made the photograph. I'm not sure. I need to look that up. I could be wrong.
It's the lighting and the fact that it's a photograph that turns it into something else, isn't it?
Yeah. And
which is what you do. This is exactly what you do.
Well, she was just hugely wonderfully helpful, to see what she'd done. She gave me that sort of permission, I suppose, in a way.
Helps to have that dialogue with people from history sometimes, doesn't it?
Oh, I think I think that's what it's for. I think I know people, was it Picasso that said, you if you're an artist, you steal, you don't borrow. But I do think that things are up for grabs once it's in the open, and I think conversations are there to be had with, these people, these artists are people that you learn from. I've always thought that, and that was kind of how I was taught as well, that you look to the past and they speak to you, and then you're able to sort of take it forward a bit and move it on.
We'll come to this in a moment, but I think it's fascinating to hear you talk about creative process and so openly about moments where you're unsure or where you think nothing's happening, and then there's a revelation and something really happens, and then you go back and reflect. And so there's so many different stages of being able to assimilate, information and digest it. And some of that seems very obvious where you've been productive. And one of those things is that kind of gathering from the past, which is what we're looking at here, I guess, influences and how they just sit in your consciousness until you make something yourself. But this picture in particular, you talk about this as your favorite thing. Tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, this is my favorite picture. This is Piero della Francesca, and it's the Madonna del Parto. And I'm sorry, I don't have a date. I should have, but it's a Renaissance painting, and it's in this beautiful little church in a place called Monterchi in Italy. And I've been to see it. And I think if you see The English Patient, there's actually a wonderful scene where Juliette Binoche is swinging on a sort of a rope in this gallery and holding up a torch, and you can see going on and off these amazing frescoes in this church, and with this particular one. So that's a very worth seeing that film to catch that scene, actually. But yeah, this painting for me sums up what I do think art is about. I mean, it's a little bit romantic of me to think this, but it's got what I'm interested in is the sort of performative aspects of what we do in front and behind the camera, and as artists, I suppose even just the way one makes work is performative in some way, it could be argued. And so there's this stage there where these two angels are holding up the curtains, and this sort of proscenium arch, which looks a bit like the inside of a rather splendid tent. And she's stood there, she's the Madonna with she's pregnant, so she's waiting to produce something, and we know it's going to be something very beautiful or good, and but we don't know what the future will be for her from her point of view. And so there's this idea of sort of expectancy and latency. Something is going to happen, so there's this excitement, and then just the color blue, which is just the most the sort of pared back nature of the painting, the fact that it's almost a drawing, and that the paint is not so very rich, but it's enough, just enough. And then
we'll come back to Renaissance painting, won't we, in a moment?
Yeah.
It's quite direct connection with you, but this is another element of your influence, which is incredible levels of kind of amateur obsession in a way that produces something really unique and remarkable. Can you talk us through what this is?
Yes, this is the Palais IDL, and I'm really sorry, again, I don't know where in France it is. It's sort of in the middle of France. That's about as close as I can tell you, but it's a real place, and it's by the postman Ferdinand Cheval, who was an amateur. He was a postman and he never trained as an artist, and what he did was he just started building this thing. I think it started off quite small and it just grew like Topsy into this enormous palace, which you can walk around today, and it's made of odds and ends from the garden, bits of rubble from, places nearby, and he just worked on it obsessively. So it's all about obsession and joy and the love of making, and kind of probably he wasn't even questioning it. He was probably just obsessing and making, and I just think this is something, we talk about amateur, being amateurish or an amateur as something in quite derogatory, negative fashion, and I think what could possibly be wrong with making something because of the joy of it and because you love it and you're obsessed about it? I mean, that has to be a good thing, it's something to aspire to. So I'm making it my mission now to aspire to, if anyone calls me amateur, I will take it as a huge compliment.
Because you don't have to feel like you're needing to make a commercial job of it, and it allows you to break the rules.
I think so. It gives you freedom, and also the fact that if it's professional, it's very much, it has to have something to do with money, and that kind of deep basis. And so I know I'm sounding extremely airy-fairy now by saying this, but I just think there's something about this idea of trying to push something to its absolute limits and just testing it to the absolute nth degree of what it might go to. Was this ever going to, how could this stand up and how could this stay up? And he just kept going and going and going, and he just did it for his entire life. 40 years he took to make it.
There's a sort of association with amateurism as well, that you use what's to hand.
Yeah.
But you can make remarkable discoveries when you pare down what you have around you, because you're not distracted by what else is possible. And I see that in your work too, in this very kind of pared down way. Let's move on, because we've got sort of 20 left, if that. So we
need to hurry up.
Back to your work again.
So this is going back to 2005. This was a show at Photo Gallery, but the work was started in 2003. And these are silicone jelly molds that are lit in a quite amateur way with torches and just household torches and things, and shot at dusk in the countryside. And this is a silicone mold, jelly mold, and that was from a series called Glowing. And then this one was a sort of sister piece that was made in Holland called Gamma, and they kind of are opposites of each other. So there was this idea of Glowing was very much, single objects placed in front of the, close up to the camera, and then and it was because of, I made it because I was it was at the time of the Iraq War, And I was absolutely furious by the Iraq War and this idea of weapons of mass destruction and the absurdity of that, and the absurdity of the sort of the way it was being sort of sold to us. And so I was looking for a really absurd way to kind of portray this without hectoring or lecturing the audience. And so of course the humor does come in, and I've always been quite influenced as well, I didn't mention this before, by really bad sci-fi B movies. So this was taking that idea of these things from outer space that could, you know, end up in the landscape. That was that one. And then this one was sort of reverse of glowing. It was 12 very tiny black and white hand printed and toned photographs, and to create a sort of sinister post-apocalyptic irradiated scene, as if objects from outer space again had landed and settled and taken over the world. But instead all the color had been leached out. And I wanted to convey this darkness by using a brightness to convey that, so that it was the opposite, you know, it was all about opposites. And then the sort of the heat, which was sort of demonstrated by the cold tone of the printing, which you can't really see here, but these show you the scales of what it was like when it was shown. So the glowing ones were very much well, they were light boxes, so they were quite big. And that I liked the idea of this utilizing the method of production as a conceptual way to kind of sort of consume the work, you know, so that it was like the only way these pictures could be seen was if they were lit from behind, and the only way that those jellies could be seen was if they were lit from underneath. So it was kind of, that was the thinking. That's why I was particularly happy with that presentation. And then these being very, very tiny, so again, so it was quite a different sort of experience in the exhibition. So I sort of put those in because of that idea around the absurdity and scale. Scale is quite a key thing for me, really. And then again, talking about absurdity and humor, and we talked a bit about working with what's there, working with what's at hand. This is from a body of work called Everyday Dada, which was published as a book and made roughly at the same time as the other work. And this shows, this was the first image for the whole project, in fact, and it came by accident, which is why I've put it in, because it speaks to some stuff from later. And so the accident being that, you know, at the time I was making a sandwich for my lunch, obviously, and I must have been, you know, the sink is here, and I must have been looking for a knife to butter my bread, and looked over and saw that the three kind of doofers where you put your tea towels were empty, because I was obviously doing a wash. And so I just, you know, the instant thought was, oh, what happens if I do that? You know, 3 holes, 3 bits of objects, you know, and then, you know, I'd make a picture of it. But I was saying to you before that, you know, when I was younger, when I was, you know, before I was sort of in my 40s, I never would have dreamed of doing that, because it would have been like, oh, this is a stupid idea, I can't possibly do it. But once I got past the hump of being in my 40s and older, you just thought, well, you know, if I don't try this out, how are we going to know? You know, so just push these things to the limit.
I just found it really kind of a charming and funny and appealing. And you have that kind of childlike ability to play and do things that you're not, you know, you're not allowed to play with your food as a child, are you? No. You're told off for playing with your food. And, you know, it's almost like one of the first creative acts, you know, moving peas around on your plate and seeing what happens if you squash them.
Yeah.
So I mean, I liked that sense of you really addressing that and playing.
It's interesting because I've never had to explain my work to an 8-year-old. You know, it's like children get it, whereas it's, you know, grown-ups quite often don't always get it. They just think, are you mad? And it's said to me quite a few times. With this one, was quite funny because this is actually a bit of, well, this is the needles, I think, but there was something. I did another one with Durdle Door of mashed potato and peas, and that was partly because the National Trust had copyright over these sites of special interest, and the only way, you're not allowed to photograph them without permission. So I thought, well, I'll make my own version, and, you know, it's like, blow that, I'll make it out of mashed potato and peas and photograph that. And so that was how the thinking behind some of this. These are and then this was just taking it further, because it's in sort of 4 chapters, this little book, which had, so the first one was a scenic cookery, so everything in the book is food, everything, and this one is House Beautiful, which is spam in my kitchen, walls, and I think the last chapter was serving suggestion, of which the ham one was also a serving suggestion as well. But serving suggestion came from that idea, when just from being a child, actually, and, you know, helping my mum put the shopping away and looking at the tins and the packets and seeing pictures of something that bore absolutely no relation to what was inside that tin on pictured, and just thinking, and then underneath the little legend, serving suggestion, you just sort of thought, oh, I could, here's a few serving suggestions of mine then, you know. And
it seems very timely, like they could, this could be a lockdown project, couldn't it?
It could now.
Staring at either our desks or, you know, a sort of home office situation, and then going to make lunch and come back again. And the kind of repetition of that, almost kind of paranoid situation where we're looking again at the sandwich we're having to have for our lunch and return to the home office. You know, it's ahead of its time, this one. Sure.
Yeah, you might be right there. Thank you for that. But there was another one that I did a bit later where I'd done a whole messing about with masks, and that was a bit ahead of its time, because at the time I nearly chucked them out and thinking, these are terrible pictures, what have I done that with? And then of course COVID struck, and it was like, oh, I put them back in again. So suddenly it was quite timely to have these mask pictures. But oh, and what's happened there? So this is the point where, you know, I become, well, I come out from behind the camera, and I had been sort of thinking a lot about the performative aspects of the work, because obviously everything up till now has been performed. It was just always the objects were performing, or the camera was sort of helping with the performance. And so somebody had written something, Ian Biggs had written an essay about my work where he had said that there was performative elements, and that I was sort of like an avant-garde gardener. And I thought, well, when I had this residency, this is from a series called Kaput, and it was a residency of 6 weeks, where I had this space and time to actually question things a little bit more. I like residencies, because they give you this sort of space out of time almost, so you can actually, you know, really delve into your practice a bit and ask questions about what it is you're doing and try and find out a bit more. So anyway, these are 2 grabs, video grabs, and the series of work, the project was based around notions of work. That was the theme. You had to interpret it in whatever way you wanted to. And they didn't work as a video, but I was interested in how you know, what I might do next, and ended up doing it for real with a big camera and some assistance. So this is health and safety, it turned into. So that's the first one, and the second one. And again, sort of very absurd, very kind of weird process of what happened going through this work. Shall I move on?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's important to highlight these because they are, as you say, the first time that you kind of appear in front of the camera, and you're kind of unafraid to do that and put yourself forward as a kind of figure that enacts these absurd situations. Like you're kind of reading like verbatim what you should do in the health and safety manual, and it turns into something really absurd if you actually follow it to the letter, or you try and to make sense of it. So it's like a script in a way, isn't it? It's like a kind of Dada script where you follow, you know, what would happen if you obeyed the rules as it's written, in a way. Am I right in thinking?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you've just put it beautifully, Martin. That's exactly. I hadn't thought of it like that before, but absolutely, you're correct, and it definitely is this idea of, you know, kind of, you know, working as writing, you know, so the photograph is sort of like writing itself as you're going along. And
that's been tremendously liberating for a lot of artists that I've spoken with, you know, whenever they've had a kind of block, or they've decided that, you know, they're trying to work with the aesthetics and the quality of something, and comparing with what other people have done, finding it very hard to move forward, and actually then coming up with a kind of system that allows them to break out of that, because whatever results from the system is okay. You know, following a sort of set of rules that lead you down paths that might actually be mistakes, you know, and following those errors and mistakes has led to something visually very distinctive that is often kind of quite neatly disruptive and strangely radical, because you don't expect it. And we'll come to, I think we need to move on a bit as well, because we've got quite a few things to get through. But I like this idea that you have of kind of pictures that you shouldn't make, you know, that you're not really allowed to make, or that pictures that who would want them, you know. So we'll come to that, but let's have a look at, because this is the moment where you're dealing with a title, an evocative title and an image, and you've sort of removed the sculptural objects that might normally have appeared in your pictures in this set of images. What's going on here? This is using imagination more. Yes,
this is very much because of the way that the work had flowed up until this point. So this would have been 2008, so probably about 13 years ago, and this was yet another residency in Ireland, this time in a place in Cove near Cork, and very in the countryside. And I had this terrible mental block when I got there. I couldn't really, I didn't know what to do. And I'd been sort of wandering about and looking at things and photographing things in a desultory sort of way. But at the same time, I thought I was reading quite a lot, and I wanted to read up on the history of Ireland. And I also wanted to read about more of the sort of issues around folk history, folklore. And I got really into this book that was all about folklore and fairy forts and the fairies, and as a malign force and being cast astray. So this whole idea of being cast astray. This was two halves, this body of work. So this was the first half, which is meetings with the other crowd or something like that. I can't quite remember the title. And the thing about it was that I, instead of actually as you've mentioned, putting objects in there that actually would sort of disrupt the view or anything else. I wanted to do that just by thinking it in or imagining it in. So I was thinking very strongly at the time around this whole idea of being cast astray, and the fact that fairy roads, they would be fairy roads leading to fairy forts, so always straight and they were always grass. And so this is like a, you know, at any point if I walked along this road, I might be taken by the fairies. And so that was how I thought of that. But this was hugely influential for me, in that hugely influential for me from the point of view of being able to think, imagine something happening, you know, in the image, and take it forward that way. And again, this was the other half of the project, which was taking this notion of folklore and superstition to other extremes. And so some of the photographs were staged examples of superstitious activity like this one, and some of them were completely manufactured and imagined. I haven't got any here to show you, just took this one. But the reason I'm showing these at the moment is because these lead directly then into the next body of work, which is coming up to the last things now, when I went to Rome in 2011. I had I was the second recipient of the PhotoWorks British School at Rome Senior Research Fellowship, and that allowed me to go to Rome to the British School to have my own studio there for 3 months, which was the most amazing experience and one of the most life-changing experiences that I've had as well. And so I started off with this idea around superstition and folklore, and so I was looking at objects and various things that could describe folklore activity, and was just documenting it really. This is unfinished, this body of work. These are from a series called The Pangs of Love, which we haven't got time to go into that, but it's a quote from Roland Barthes in Camera Lucida, and it was very much about the other scholars and artists that were there with me, and the exchange between us, all of us, you know, which was very much around love and giving, but more of a sort of love in terms of work. And I think love is something that isn't mentioned enough here with these things, but that makes me sound a bit weird, but never mind. That also led on to having seen, I was looking at all these paintings, Renaissance paintings, and obviously knowing that I have this love for Piero and others, and Rome was absolutely, you know, littered with these things, so I was having a field day, and I got very interested in this idea of the halo and the materiality of the halo, and the fact that it must weigh quite a lot, and how interesting it must be to be holy, a holy person, and it must be quite hard work being a holy person, because all that gold on your head must hurt. And, you know, these are just thoughts that went through from partly continuing on from my childhood as a Protestant child that was sort of put through the catechism by a crazy mother. If this was sort of like the basis for this body of work, and I was sort of re-performing the gestures that I found in these paintings. This all came from one very, very big painting in Florence, and I can't remember the name of it, but it had loads and loads of people in it. It was not really that important because it wasn't about re-performing that particular painting, but it was about this idea of men, women, holy people, not holy people, but all of them were performing in quite a sort of extraordinary way, and I wanted to look at these gestures and re-perform those and see what would happen. And I was wearing this costume was very important. So this dress, which was this strange Italian mummer's house coat, you know, that you do your kind of cleaning in, and that I was wearing a sort of picnic platter on my head as well, you know, plastic picnic, golden picnic platter. So it was kind of almost, it was like profanity in using, you know, these depicting these holy people, but using these very lowly costume materials. And then that led then on to the final piece, where I had then started to look at gesture a lot more. And this was manners, which are the 9 manners of prayer of St. Dominic, which I reformed in the space of one day. It was a very, very hot day. I was wearing my kind of grey velour dressing gown, and with shorts and a t-shirt underneath, and boiling hot. It was 40 degrees heat, and I was kind of in the zone, running around. You wouldn't know it looking at these, they're very calm, but it was frenzied activity just to get these poses right. And it was just me in the studio, nobody else. And
it just felt like, so I saw this when you brought this in, and this felt like such a different register, but I could see how you'd got there from, you know, this kind of sense of trying to perform something, and then you kind of abandoned some of those props and ended up with a sequence of pictures. There was this sort of serial set of very kind of devotional imagery, which was somewhere between yoga and, you know, kind of religious posing within this monastic kind of cell, which is the artist's studio that you have, with just the constant of light and the camera and you performing. And I was sort of really kind of shocked about what these were doing and how you'd arrived at them. So I'm really interested to have talked with you this evening to see that journey and how you kind of arrived at something like this and are able to occupy these different positions as an artist, you know, both in front of the lens and with a kind of different emotional approaches that range from kind of comedy with an undertow of dead seriousness to this kind of spiritual quality. Sian, we're going to have to wrap up quite soon, because we'd like to allow a bit of time for questions. Are there any few final images you want to
I think I'm going to, yes, because, well, these just were from later, the most recent revisit to Rome. I was lucky enough to get back there for a month in August in 2017. And again, just talking about this idea about, you know, we've been talking a little bit about Dada and paring things away. And so this is very much a kind of exercise of Dada, if you like, where I'm chucking a towel at a chair in the studio. Don't ask me why. And then, of course, that it sort of spoke to me of Marcel Duchamp's 3 standard stoppages, which were made again 100 years ago. And very much this idea of chance and effect. So dropping a piece of string onto some paint 3 different times and getting 3 different shapes of this, you know, and it was just playing with that idea of what happens if I do this in the same way as a sandwich. And then the other idea, which was around what is the least I need to do to perform to actually cause some kind of affect, and dealing with abject and the idea of pictures that nobody wants to see and pictures that the camera refuses to take. We're not meant to do these pictures. This is with some joke teeth, but and then again, just utilizing what's there. There was a sort of kettle hiatus in the kitchen, which I won't go into now, but it was a gift for me to play with these kettles. And again, just performing with a box, like had no idea before the video, this video grabs, no idea before I go in front of that video screen what I'm going to do. It's like, what do I do? And messing about with Claude Cahun there, and again, utilising trestles that were around the school and every kind of formation of trestles. There was about 16 of these pictures, but I've just got 3 here to show you. And then literally the last one, which is this, paring everything back to the essence of what it is and what you're allowed to make a picture with. So I will end there.
Thank you, Sian. That's brilliant. It's lovely to see that journey, and particularly the paring down, ending with the brooms that might sweep everything clean, but rely on each other. We hand back to Michael and Joe, perhaps.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Sian.
Thanks, Sian. We've got time. We're slightly over time, but we just start a couple of minutes after 6. So I'm going to squeeze in a couple of questions we have here from our audience. So there's some very positive comments from Michelle Shank and Carolyn Mendelson. So thank you both for those. But let's go to a couple of the questions that have come in. And I'm going to take them in a slightly different order than they came in. So you spoke about amateur. And if you'd carried on with nursing, do you still think you would be making art? And if so, would it be similar to that which you're making today?
Yes, I think so, because I did do that when I was a nurse, and I didn't say too much about it, but I actually was setting up still lives for my patients to draw, the ones that I was on a ward with people that had more sort of genetic things wrong with them rather than actual illnesses. So they were in effect quite well, and bored rigid. So we would set up still life and I'd teach them to draw. And then I did that a bit later because I did go back to the nursing when I was doing my master's in Newcastle. It was the time of the miners' strike and it was very hard to get jobs. And so I had to go back to nursing, and I was an oncology nurse for about 4 or 5 years while I was there. And I ended up, a lot of the patients that were near to the end of their life, a lot of them, their biggest regret was that they'd never learned to draw. So it was kind of, quite a strange thing to do, but to actually help them to draw. So yeah, so it kind of did work anyway. But thank you, that's a good question.
And the other one that sort of follows on from that, you spoke about the transition that maybe came about in your 40s. So our question is asking, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, I would just tell my younger self to just stop being so stupid, not to listen to people, and to just get on with it. Just go for it. And just when you have an idea, just don't think, do. That's what I would tell her.
That sounds like a perfect time to bring this evening to a close. So on behalf of the RPS, I'd like to thank you, Sian, for sharing some of your career with us and for illuminating actually some of the thinking behind it, which I think as photographers, and I know there are quite a lot in our audience, that's often the most valuable thing to hear. And thank you, Martin, for bringing that out and delving into that with Sian, because these conversations often bring out more by having two people that know and have respected each other's work over the years. So thank you both for doing that for us this evening, and thank you, Joe, for arranging this evening and bringing Martin and Sian together on behalf of the RPS. So thank you both for that this evening, and thank you to our audience for staying with us. We'll send details of our next talk in this series to you all, and thank you again, Sian and Martin, for your time this evening. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica, for your comment, by the way.